So for those of you joining us online, we did not record the first paragraph from this morning before our meditation, which spans up in the book Contemplating Christ, pages 109 to 110, and we'll go ahead and pick up from there. So the second reading this morning spans 110 to 111. It's actually quite a long paragraph because in the midst of it we have a citation from Paul. So the examination of conscience is an honest appraisal of one's interior life before God, whose unconditional love makes it possible to admit of one's demons without fear or denial. Ascesis is not a morbid obsession with one's guilt or sense of unworthiness, but a celebration of the experience of being loved unconditionally by God. When we fail to confront our inner demons, we risk projecting them onto others. The battle is either fought within or it is thrust on others whom we literally demonize. This is why Jesus challenged the angry mob gathered around an adulteress. Let the one without sin cast the first stone. His admonishment was, in fact, a call to arms, a revolutionary summons to make war on the only battlefield that really matters, one's own heart. But let us not mistake asceticism with spiritual athleticism. Athletic discipline is undertaken to succeed and triumph. Asceticism is undertaken precisely so that in failing, God might triumph in us. With Paul, we succeed when we accept we cannot save ourselves. For we know that the law is spiritual, he says, but I am of the flesh, sold into slavery under sin, and I do not understand my actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good. But in fact, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells in me. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inmost self, but I see in my members another law at war with the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ, our Lord. That's from Romans 7:14 to 25. Any attempt to prove oneself worthy is the very thing that becomes an affront to God, because such efforts imply a lack of faith in the one thing necessary, faith in Christ, the one who has raised us beyond the categories of worthiness and unworthiness to that of beloved. This is not to suggest morality and virtue have no role in the contemplative life. They do. But historically, there has been a stubborn tendency in Christianity to communicate a secret form of Pharisaism that places the ethical cart before the horse. The trap we keep falling into is the temptation to make salvation conditional on an adherence to a new set of laws or regulations. It is as if Christians prefer the safety of their slavery to the law, unable to accept the radical freedom of the gospel we claim to profess. But, says Paul, now we are discharged from the law, dead to that which held us captive, so that we are slaves not under the old written code, but in the new life of the Spirit. And let us pray. Our Mother, who in heaven gives birth for all eternity, holy is your name. In tranquility, may you reign over us as your deepest desire unfolds in us on earth as in heaven. Gift us this day the bread of life, and look tenderly upon us in our frailty, as we look tenderly on all who are small of mind and heart. Enfold us that we may remain on the way, and protect us from all that would harm us. Amen. So as we begin our discussion today, I do want to just alert you to one upcoming event that you will find on our website. And I have it posted here for you. I'm beginning in mid-February a first in a series of courses that I'm calling Portraits of Christ. And it's an introduction to the Gospels intended specifically for a critical review of them, but also intended specifically for contemplatives. I would direct you to our website, St. Columba's, to look at that. And the reason I wanted to advertise it to this group is not only because it's geared toward how we might better understand the historical context of the Gospels in a way that helps us better do Lectio, access the Gospels in prayer, but also because of some generous donors, we do have a very healthy scholarship fund available for those who would like to participate and who otherwise might find it difficult economically and so on. If you go to the website and you see this, you can learn more about what it is we'll be doing, the scope and focus of that, what you can expect from the course, and also registration. If you go to this registration link and find that you do need assistance, please just go ahead and indicate that in the appropriate place, and we'll be able to assist you with scholarships for that. So because of those donors, I just wanted to alert you all to that if anybody's hesitant to take the course, and that begins in mid-February. You can learn more about that on the website. Okay, let me open then the discussion this morning to whatever thoughts or questions you have on this sort of conversation around asceticism as the practice really of not succeeding, but learning how to fail, learning how to allow God to do in us what we discover we can't do in ourselves, and the freedom that comes from that beyond the mere following of laws or conforming to ethics, but allowing right action to flow from right being, we might say. So I just open the floor to whatever thoughts or questions are emerging this morning. Good morning, Elspeth. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Father Vincent. And it's afternoon here.
Yes, sorry.
That's quite okay. It's just the sun's starting to set.
Oh.
The last sentence of the first passage that you read reads, asceticism is a commitment to live in a way that is whole and holistic, disarmed by an honest interrogation of one's own heart. As you read it and as I've reread it, I feel that I would love you to unpack that sentence. It feels like there's so much in it. Could you possibly do a bit of unpacking, please?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. So I posted it there so folks can access that that paragraph. One of the overall goals I had in writing this chapter was to respond to, or maybe fill in the gaps or offer a correction to a gap that I perceived largely in the conversations happening among contemplative Christians in the modern world. In other words, I didn't see a lot of conversation around asceticism. There are hints at it, but not really a developed theology around it. We've developed a lot of theology around prayer and particularly silence and what to do with the silence. And Father Keating, I think, attempted to show or demonstrate the practice of asceticism in his welcoming prayer, to sort of just accept what's coming at you in the moment in a trustful way. But I really didn't see a lot going on in terms of providing a theological basis for what asceticism is and why we do it. And I found that a little problematic because it has been absolutely central, not only to Christian contemplative practice, but to meditative traditions around the world, to accompany that almost like the way you would braid hair. It's almost inseparable. The two strands, asceticism and prayer, become one thing. And I sensed this real imbalance in our theologizing around asceticism. And I think the reasons are manifold, but primarily I think there is a misunderstanding in the modern world around both what asceticism is as something that is body-hating and kind of severe and austere and dour, kind of anti-body, and so a real reluctance to move into a discussion or an exploration of that, not only in theologically, spiritually, but also in practice. And what I'm trying to do is to frame what I think the heart of asceticism is about in this chapter. I'm trying to give us a theology of asceticism. And so as we've been discussing since we started this chapter, in some ways, it is on one hand a grappling with our demons, those shadow sides of self that come out of either woundedness or complacency, as I referred back to in the paragraphs today. But really that the goal of asceticism is to fail, because when we look at the tradition, that's how it's played itself out, that we strive, that asceticism isn't about us becoming spiritual athletes, or isn't about a body-hating worldview, but actually sets right the relationship within Christianity between the freedom of the gospel and then what it means to live an ethical life. And as I mentioned in the paragraphs today, I think we have this tendency to veer away from the radical freedom that Christ is offering in the Gospels, and that Paul understood very well through his own experience, and to replace that radical freedom with just a new set of rules and laws and regulations that come out of the church. And so the very type of legalism and rigidity that Jesus was railing against throughout the Gospels is not in any way a real admonishment against, say, Judaism in its deepest sense, but against the legalization of Judaism that had calcified, those accretions that had calcified by the time Jesus was preaching. And we've seen then that same tendency 2,000 years later for the church to move in that same direction, to calcify its teachings so that we're just living under a new set of rules and laws. I mean, even if you look at the term a holy day of obligation, as opposed to a holy day of celebration, for example, how something that is intended to be celebratory becomes obligatory. We see that same tendency in some forms of Judaism, where the very notion of Sabbath being a positive day of rest becomes this very strict, rule-oriented requirement that, I think from any objective means in some cases is obsessive. I can't open a refrigerator door because it'll turn the light on, and that's work. And so now I've somehow breached the Sabbath. With due respect, I think that's deeply problematic for what the Sabbath means within Judaism in its deepest heart. And I see that's what I think Jesus was railing against, that kind of rigidity. And because we're fearful by nature, the very message that intended to free us in the gospel, we've simply developed our own Christian rules around those things to ensure that we're not going outside the lines. And then what happens then is it's precisely the life of ethics and morals that begins to govern everything. And the religion becomes more about behavior modification rather than being free in Christ, which is what Paul is talking about when he says, no law can touch you. So what I'm trying to frame, this is a sort of long way of coming to your specific paragraph, that asceticism is a commitment to live in a way that is whole and holistic, disarmed by an honest interrogation of one's own heart. What I'm suggesting is that the fear that drives legalism in Judaism or Christianity is the fear of condemnation. And so everything becomes reduced to right action, ethical behavior, morals, right? And the result is that we don't really move to a place of intimacy with God because we're just trying to not anger God, right? We're just trying to live within this framework of where we'll be safe before the divine judgment, as it were. And so what I'm suggesting here is a real, I think, authentic intention around what asceticism is about is not being strictly legalistic or following excessive behaviors like sleep deprivation and excessive fasting and so on, but to have the capacity to look with honest interrogation at my shadow, not out of fear, but because I know that I am completely reliant on grace, on divine love and compassion, and that it will be there when I need it, right? That I have the capacity to look authentically at my shadow with truth and with a sort of an honesty that allows me to really see it and know that I'm doing that in the arms of a loving God. And it's in that process by which I can now, not out of fear, but throwing myself, if you want to say, before the arms of a loving God, can say, this is me, this is really who I am, this is my shadow, these are my wounds, this is the darkness I struggle with, right? Then we begin to honestly be able to thaw some of the grip that those things have on us, because we are doing that in an intimate relationship with the divine, where we know that it is grace-filled and not judgment-based. And if we are implicitly or explicitly developing a legalistic relationship, transactional relationship with the divine, then we necessarily reduce the radical freedom of the gospel to a new form of Pharisaism, law-abiding, where I know I'm just going to act right, but not really deal with what's beneath, right? What's really going on in my own woundedness. And so that process of being able to look at that word we've become all allergic to, my sin, right? If I can really acknowledge that and then say, I can't, you must. These are the patterns I cannot free myself from. And I am telling you this because you, God, because I know that I am under this power. I am, whether that's patterns of behavior or the things I've learned from family or society or fears or whatever that is, I can look at it with honesty and in that grow into a wholeness of being, into an authentic wholeness of intimate relationship with God. And that freedom frees me to love more fully, frees me to love others with less strings, with less conditions, with less judgment. And in this, we grow into a more holistic spiritual life. That's how I would try to unpack that. I don't know, Elspeth, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think that, and I see the other hands, Ruth, I'll come to you just a moment. I think that one of the way that the idea of sin has been used in much of your generation and mine too, has made us resistant to understanding the value of looking at that pure examination of conscience, because we're so tired of a sin-soaked Christianity, of a rule-based Christianity, of a Christianity whose God is stingy and judgmental and demanding, rather than gracious and loving and forgiving. But if we really dispense entirely with the idea that we can and in fact do sin, we don't have the capacity to look at the shadow. And if we don't do that, we can't be free of it, right? And we can't allow ourselves to open to the grace that says, I can't, you must. And this is why I keep talking about asceticism as teaching us how to fail. Because finally, when we realize, just like Paul, I can't do this. I keep trying and I'm trying and trying. And somewhere along the lines, I mess up. To be able to accept that that's okay, right? That the love of God fills that in the moment I can recognize that and lifts me up. Then every time we fall is not a defeat. It's an invitation and an opportunity to allow God to raise us up again. But we have to be open to the honesty to that dynamic in us. Ruth, so thanks, Elspeth, for the question. Ruth, go right ahead.
Father Vincent, I find myself reading fewer books and reading those fewer books more often and more deeply. And Contemplating Christ is one of them. Thomas Keating's Invitation to Love is one of them. Jim Finley's Christian Meditation is one of them. And they seem to all speak to the same themes in different ways, and that helps me. This particular passage we're focusing on today is one that is permanently bookmarked in Contemplating Christ, because it is a concept that I have struggled probably for 2 or 3 years now to understand with my heart, not with my mind. And there are 2 terms that I have struggled with, and one is the ascesis, and the other one is apatheia. And as contemplative prayer, I haven't mastered contemplative prayer. I will never master contemplative prayer. But there is a growing sense that contemplative prayer is starting to master me. And as that happens, the understanding of ascesis does start to sink and grasp, hold, as does the beginning understanding of apatheia. It seems to me that through the ascetic practices, apatheia starts to make sense as a concept not of apathy, but as the concept of well, Cynthia Bourgeot talks about radical detachment. Would you speak to those two terms together? Would you speak to the relationship you see between those two concepts?
And by the two, you mean apatheia and asceticism?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Great question. So we do get the English word apathy from apatheia, but that is not what it means in its context, in its Greek context. So pathos has to do with the passions, and the a in before it is the negation of that. Like we would have the word ahistorical to negate something that's historical. We still have that, or sometimes we use in English for the same purpose. I'm unhappy. Apatheia means, in a sense, without attachment to passions. And by passions, it means those, not passion like, oh, I'm a passionate person who loves, or I have passion for justice. It's talking about those aspects of myself that prevent me from loving fully. So whether that's anger or greed or gluttony, or all of those things are considered sort of the passions that enslave me, what we're calling, for lack of a better term, are demons. So apatheia is arriving at a place of radical detachment, and it's like I believe it was Macarius of Egypt who says that even the smallest string attached to the leg of the sparrow prevents her from taking flight, right? So anything that we're attached to prevents us from being spiritually free. And in many ways, the entirety of the Christian contemplative life is slowly untangling those little threads that are wrapped around our ankles, holding us down, right? And at least opening to the grace that allows that to happen. So one might say then that asceticism, which is a broad range of practices of that interrogation, of what we would see in the Eastern Church of watchfulness, the idea of just observing, of noticing, of looking, seeing what's coming in and out of my mind and heart, that broad range of attempts, if you want to say, at self-interrogation or of freedom leads ultimately to the freedom that is apatheia, right? The apatheia becomes the outcome, the freedom from passions, which is really the flip side of the coin of saying, now, if I'm free from those passions, what am I free for? What I'm free for is to love completely, to love without condition, to love fully, right? Without judgment and so forth. So that's how I would understand the relationship to them. Apatheia is a state of mind or a state of being that asceticism, or ultimately failing at asceticism, leads to, because we open up to the grace of God, who then frees us ultimately from those things. So the whole project, if you want to say, is really about learning how to love without condition. That's what it boils down to. And that's what the Desert Mothers and Fathers and the Christian ascetics, and frankly, I think ascetics of all traditions, are ultimately after. Does that help, Ruth?
Yes, it does. Very much.
Just for the record, you might have been present to it, but I did a short presentation of an hour or so at St. Columba's, which you can see the recording of, on apatheia. So I explore that more deeply. Yeah, if you're interested, you can go and grab that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Jessica, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are.
Good morning, and good morning, everybody, and evening to those of you who are elsewhere. Father Vincent, I hope that it's okay that I share this short story and reflection on it, but I just listened to this audio book that I listened to. It's by an Indian Hindu, and his name is Ruskin Bond, and it's a short story that he called The Superior Man. And after your reading, it immediately brought me to that story, in which it's about this Brahmin, and he is very pious, and he's an ascetic, and he does all the things you were just talking about. He puts himself through suffering. He sleeps outside at night in the cold, and he makes sure he's dirty. He wears rags if he's wearing any clothes. So just as you were describing. And at one point he goes and he boasts and says, wow, there's no one quite like me, thinking of himself as very holy. And this voice of the Spirit comes to him and says, you should not have boasted. There's a shopkeeper out there that's much more virtuous than you. And he's the most virtuous of men. And so, of course, the ascetic is like, I have to meet this man. And so on his way there, it's kind of a funny part, but this bird lands on his head. And so then he's like, oh, I can be very ascetic. And so he doesn't move while the bird lands in his head. And then the bird builds a nest, and then the bird has little eggs. And then he just sits there, piously. He says, I'm not going to disturb this bird. And then the little chicks are born, and he waits until they fly away. And once they do, again, he says, oh, I'm so holy. And the voice comes back and he says, you should not have boasted. There's still the shopkeeper that is very virtuous. And so he's like, that's right. I need to go meet the shopkeeper. And so he meets the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper says, oh, welcome. I've heard about you. You're this great ascetic. And he says, well, tell me about your wisdom. What is it about the way that you live that makes you so holy and wise? And the shopkeeper steps back. He says, I just follow the ancient traditions of the Vedas of universal friendliness and kindness to humanity and creatures, no cheating, no lying, but loving all and not hating anyone. And in doing so, it's funny because the shopkeeper starts to become very assertive and kind of critical, and starts to as he's describing his life, you're realizing that he's critical of people that don't live in that way. Like he wants to help the creatures, so he doesn't believe in, he's vegan and those kinds of things that in being so virtuous, he's judging others. And so at the end of the story, it says that they both died and they both end up going to their own individual heavens. And, and as I was thinking about this short story, I was trying to listen to you because in my mind, I was thinking, well, what's wrong with the shopkeeper? He seems to be living that holistic life. And just now, as you were sharing your responses, it made me realize that the problem of the shopkeeper is that he's in his virtuous mind, in his whether or not he was intending it, he seemed to be criticizing those that did not live that life, rather than just letting go of the intention or the purpose, and in this very selfish purpose, really. And he was, in fact, as you said, blind to his own shadows. And so I wanted to share that story because it just seemed to really coincide.
Yeah, Jessica, thank you. It's a great story, actually. And it reminds me of the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, who where an uncle demon is teaching his nephew how to trip up human beings. And pride is one of the ways in which we get nabbed. Just when we think we're holier than somebody else, pride sets in and says, look at me, I'm so great. I mean, and this really is the same story that Jesus tells in the gospel between, the publican and then the sinner who's in the back of the synagogue, saying, forgive me, have mercy, have mercy. And the other one is standing in the front saying, look at how fabulous I am and how spiritual and how enlightened. I mean, it's in many ways, it's an old narrative told in multiple ways, but it all has that same message, which is why I keep driving home the idea that what I love about the reading I took from Paul today is that he understands what it is to try to be perfect, to try to save yourself. Mm-hmm. And he realizes over and over again, the patterns just are relentless and he just can't. There's always some infraction that now he has to go sacrifice a pigeon because he touched the wrong person, or made himself unclean, or whatever the case may be. And that there is a certain precariousness to living, in our frailty, in our humanness, as we strive to be perfect, to be good, to love people and all creatures. No matter what we do, there are infractions, there are failures. And what is beautiful about the Christian ascetical life is that it is precisely those failures that detach us. It's where God it comes in and says, you can't, but I can, right? Let go, and you realize it's about allowing yourself to be loved in your imperfection. Stories that kind of, that get at this question of once I arrive, what would happen, for example, if as an ascetic I did succeed, whatever success is? Well, then I could come away and say, look at me, I saved myself. Right. I remember being in Thailand a number of years ago and seeing statues of Buddha all along a temple wall that mirrored all the different stages of his life. There's the fat Buddha who decides, I'm going to indulge in everything and see where that gets me. And then the super emaciated Buddha who says, no, I'm going to try these extreme ascetical practices and fast all the time. And what he comes up with is a middle way, which is to say, don't go to any extremes, right? These extremes don't help you. They don't help you do the thing you're trying to do, which is to be loving. They just entangle you in these obsessive ways of trying to save yourself. And the freedom that comes from realizing I can't do that is profoundly liberating. It's profoundly liberating. And this is what Paul comes to understand, that, at the end when he says, who's going to save me from this mess that I am? Oh, it's Christ, and I just need to let go of trying, right? And again, by letting go of trying, it could be easily misunderstood to say that virtue and ethics and morals has no place in the Christian life. And as I say in these paragraphs, I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm suggesting is they're not the horse leading the cart. Right? It's trusting in God that is the horse that leads the cart of ethics, not the other way around. So I hope that helps, but your story is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and tying it with Christianity, I think one of the lines in the Gospels that I think is very impactful is when even Jesus says, why do you call me good? Which is God that's good and only God. And so that, not that Jesus was failing, but in the sense that he too recognizes that it's the trust in God, and that is the goodness.
Right. That's right. And very closely tied, and Kathy, I see your hand, and I'll come to you just in a moment, but I see that a while ago, Jason did ask a question about that centering prayer often feels like nothing's happening and you're just wasting your time. Join the club. Essentially, that I think is pretty much probably, if the Dalai Lama were honest with us all, he would say the same thing. So not to worry. But again, I think that your question ties in beautifully with this question of asceticism, because as I've said very often, if our prayer life and if our meditation filled us with senses of bliss and what the mystics call consolation, the sort of joy of being connected to God, we would all be meditation addicts. The problem is that we would be seeking after an experience of joy and consolation and not seeking God. You see, and so it would very quickly become a sort of wrong-headed approach, right? Where we would be wanting the joy that comes from meditation or the bliss that comes from it, rather than just a complete giving of ourselves to God in darkness and dryness and boredom and silence. So what I would like to encourage you, and I believe I'm speaking for most of us most of the time, is that it is precisely in that feeling of I'm wasting my time, this is senseless, this is boring, that we are simply being fully present as we can. It exposes the messiness of our contradictions, our inability to hold our attention, the thoughts swimming in and out of our heads, the anxieties that begin to rise up. All of this shows, in a sense, the sort of bumbling messes that we often are, and taking that to prayer and just for a brief time saying, this is me right now in this moment, I give it to you. And the purest form of prayer is the prayer that feels dark and boring and dry and worthless, because there's nothing in it for you other than the commitment to simply be present before God, who beneath experience and beneath emotion and beneath anything that I might register as a consolation or joy or bliss, beneath all of that is just a trust that in this dry darkness, God holds you. So I would want to both encourage you to hold on to that, and don't judge your meditation by what you experience in it. I always tell my students at USF, the only bad meditation is the one you skip. So there's no such thing as a bad meditation, if you want to say, no matter how dry or distracted it is, just keep returning to your prayer word. And instead of getting frustrated by how many distractions are arising, just give thanks for the fact that with every distraction, there's an invitation to turn again to God and turn again to God and turn again to God. And that is what we do. And on the rare occasion that you will have a moment of bliss, a moment of joy, a moment of tranquility or peace, accept it, give thanks for it, but don't seek it out the next time you're praying, because that's going to sideline you again, right? I would just put that out there as a quick response to that, and to encourage you to keep going. So Kathy, please.
Good morning, Father Vincent and everybody. Thank you so much for what you just said about centering prayer. That just felt like a gift. Because I so resist coming to the cushion every day, and some days are better than others. So I think I'm going to be framing this and putting it on my mirror to help bring me through those dark times that even precede getting to the cushion.
Right.
But my question, sorry, my question, I actually want to go back to the paragraph that Elspeth asked you about, and the very last phrase about an honest interrogation of one's own heart. I have tried lots of journaling methods and 4-step work, 10-step work, or whatever the other sort of follow-up to the 4-step is. And I find I just keep going in circles way above where where that examination of conscience needs to be, because I can't seem to get to the level of where the shadows are, where the things are that I need to look at and to be with and to allow transformation of. So because I tend to escape in my mind, it sort of holds me hostage in a place that's not helpful for really moving forward on a spiritual path. So I really need a boots on the ground kind of resources to help me move through incredible resistance to looking to that interrogation of my own heart. I think I have so many defenses that are keeping me from that process. So is there anything that you could say to me or suggest to help me move in a compassionate way through these resistances to begin that process of an honest interrogation?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. It's a it's a great question, and I think in many ways an honest experience that probably many of us have, whether we're aware of it or not, is that resistance to really look at shadow. We can see a lot of even how this comes out, I think, collectively around, our national struggle to look at our history, in terms of what's really become on the horizon around racism and genocide and this type of thing that just really evokes a lot of resistance, right? So I think we're seeing what you're talking about is not just a unique individual problem, but a collective problem we have as individuals, as institutions, as nations, as communities. We have these blind spots or these places where it's really hard to look with a degree of objectivity and compassion on the whole situation. But so I think you've hit on one thing that I would absolutely recommend, which is to write about it. But let me add this to it, that it's hard to look at everything at once. And very often the way into everything starts with a first step into something, some aspect of my own being, whether it's a pattern or something I see or recognize or intuit is self-destructive in some subtle or maybe not so subtle way. So that instead of feeling like you need to take on the whole of everything in you that is either lacking or what we call a shadow side. Start with the most obvious thing that you can think of. See if there's something that really it's like, okay, this is something I recognize and I can handle. It may not be the most egregious, the most self-destructive, the most painful or difficult thing for you to look at, but if you begin with that thing, you will start to see how it tethers to other things that are going on that will gradually lead you to, I think, a deeper place of authentically being able to look. So instead of trying to just simply write broadly about, how I'm grappling with these patterns in me or these behaviors, just pick one. I often think of it a lot like, I may have mentioned this, but like what an apartment looks like after a frat party the following morning, with God knows how many beer cans or whatever laying around the floor, and everything is trashed, and pizza boxes. You can't dust the furniture until you've cleared the large clutter out of the way. And so you have to start with looking at the mess and just picking one thing. Pick a pizza box or a can of beer or a cigarette butt or whatever it's going to be, and start with that. And then gradually you'll see how that unfolds. And then at the end, you can get down to the stuff you don't see, like vacuuming the dust out of the floor or dusting your furniture off, whatever the case may be. But you do have to be patient with yourself as you wake up to the mess that is your heart after a frat party, in a sense, and all the accretions that have built on. So writing about it helps to concretize and even to categorize or catalog the things you're doing, right? And then how that ultimately leads to more and more subtle nuances that are beneath those more obvious, potentially even less egregious, but more apparent things that are there. Does that resonate or make sense?
Yes, it does. And I like your idea of really just narrowing it down to just the beer cans. I got the lovely that.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things we've talked about earlier in our time together is, which I've written in the book, is how any one passage of scripture becomes our way into the entirety of scripture, into the entirety of embodying the gospel. And I think the sort of opposite is true, that any one thing or hang up or limitation or struggle we have becomes tethered or becomes the doorway to see how that is really just the entryway to a larger landscape of entangled things that I deal with, and how whether it grows out from a wounded past or a need for power or whatever that case may be in each of us, all those things become connected. So keep your cataloging going, address one thing at a time. And I'm sure long before you've even ameliorated that very first beer can you've thrown away, you will start to see that, oh, there's also this, and oh, that's connected to this. And it will lead you, I think, very gradually to a fuller picture where you can see, oh, this is the landscape in which these various patterns of behavior or places that I find myself stuck, this is where they're connected, and this is where I'm situated in the midst of that. It's like mapping it out slowly.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Kathy. Good morning, Dave. Oh, Dave, I'm sorry. You'll just want to go ahead and unmute.
I want to get rid of that demon. I said good day, all. And thank you to Elspeth and most recently, Kathy. I'd like to delve a little bit further into methods and tools. In the 3 or 4 of the conversations that we've just been happily involved with, you ended up using the term, there's a broad range of techniques or tools that might help us figure out how to free the bird. And that took my attention to your use of the word examination of conscience. Mm-hmm. And even when I first read that, I started thinking about the things that I do, not necessarily habitually in every case, but centering prayer, contemplation, the Jesuit examine procedure, Lectio Divina. It's obvious to me that there are a lot of tools and methods that can be used here. And I can almost predict you're responding to me saying, do them all, or any one of them is a good place to be. But any observation you have about the methodology that leads us to ascesis?
That's a great question, Dave. Don't tell anybody at USF, but I've never particularly found the Jesuit method of prayer inspiring. I'm much more of a Benedictine, I guess, or Trappist at heart, much more about the sort of darkness and silence than the use of imagination. But what that leads me to is to really want to point out that so much of the Christian tradition has developed around these, has developed these various methods, whether it's the Jesuit examen, as it were, or the use of imagination, which ultimately leads us to a place of identifying with various realities, theological realities. That I think a lot of it has to do with your personal makeup, right? It reminds me of what I think was. I don't know if it was Teresa Lisieux or Catherine of Siena who said, the posture you should take in prayer is the one that most moves you to love. Meaning that there isn't one right way of praying, whether you're kneeling, sitting, standing, on a bench, on a cushion. Which one moves you to love? That's the one you should take. And I would want to say the same thing about methods of prayer, that it really will vary. I'm surrounded, at USF with people who are, finding the Jesuit method really inspiring, and doing the 19th annotation and all of these things are life-changing. And for me, I have zero interest in it. So just the way we might ask ourselves, how do I pray in a way that most moves me to love in terms of my posture? We should ask the same thing about method, whether that's Lectio Divina or examination of conscience or apophatic or cataphatic, whatever that is. What's going to be a way that moves you? Do you need to engage your imagination? Is that going to help bring you to that place of a deeper sense of union with God, or letting go of all images, as we see in the hesychastic tradition of Eastern Orthodoxy and so on? And so I'm hesitant to give a specific answer other than to affirm that you give yourself sort of permission to ask, what is working here? What moves me to love is really the question. So I don't think there is at all a right or wrong answer. And for many of us, that may change throughout the history of our spiritual lives. We'll evolve into a different method or way of prayer. But let me just, before I sort of close that, if I can, Dave, wrap up. Do you have a particular method, be that the examen of conscience or Lectio or centering prayer, that has spoken to you?
Centering prayer with the taking into consideration your discussion of a few minutes ago about centering prayer. I agree with that, but I am certainly aware that over a long period of time, I can see and feel the consequences of weeks and weeks and weeks of not noticeably productive prayer. And it just occurred to me that I participate 4 days a week in Lectio Divina. And we've got a group of about 15 or 20 people who are through Lectio Divina 4 days a week, have truly become a spiritually intimate group. Mm-hmm. And the different inputs that participants provide every day become more and more open, personal, loving. And so that experience is the one most obvious to me.
Well, Dave, it's interesting, Thomas Merton has two very short essays, little books on Lectio. One is called Opening the Bible, and the other one is called Bread in the Wilderness. And they're both looking at the relationship between scripture and meditation. And he offers this sort of opening question about, like something like in citing one of the Psalms, what does Og, the king of Bashan, have to do with the interior life of prayer? Like when you're reading the Psalms and come across like these, like, how is this in any way informing like my interior life? But he really helps to expound the various ways in which scripture has been read and the value of the Psalter for Christian contemplatives now for many, many, many centuries in informing Christian contemplatives. But he's very clear about opening, like, hey, this is not the Upanishads where you're going to have some the Bible doesn't present real methods of prayer or anything about the interior life. And it just assumes the existence of God. And you kind of have to then move into that in a way that is not particularly designed, one could say, to lead us into these layers of the mystical life. But yet he goes on to defend the value of Lectio Divina, for example. And one of the things that I have found is when I'm moving into a prayer period, coming back to Kathy's point, there's a Buddhist saying that the most difficult part of meditation is finding the cushion. And I think Kathy kind of made an allusion to that. But once you do find the bench or the cushion, then the question is, okay, how do I still the mind? Your body might be in place, but is your mind and heart there yet? Right? This is the question. And here's a place where I think Examen of Conscience or Lectio Divina can just begin to move us into that place of searching with the mind until it stills on a particular word or phrase, as you know, in Lectio, that begins to speak to you. And having the right sense to know when to put the book down, when to put the liturgy of the hours or the scriptures or the Psalter, when to say, my mind has now arrived. My heart is now here. The body, mind, and heart are all here now. I can put the book down and move into a place of prayer. So part of it is designing for ourselves what works, right? In a sense, what helps me to be fully present as possible in that time of prayer, and what tools are at my disposal, if you want to say, to mix and match from the tradition that allow me to do that. And not to be afraid to experiment for a time until you kind of find that way of doing things, and to have that be the way you develop your own prayer life.
Thank you very much. What's the Merton book other than Opening the Bible?
Bread in the Wilderness.
Thank you.
It's called. Yeah, both are very short books. I think they
Thank
were
you
more
very
like
much.
essays or lectures that got developed into small publications. Thank you, Dave. Okay, Carl, please.
So one of the Beatitudes, or the Beatitude, which keeps cycling through my mind, is blessed are the pure in heart, because I know who the poor are, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who suffer, but blessed are the pure in heart. Just, I'm not sure where they are. And so the only thing that suggests itself to me is, blessed are the purifying. Blessed are those who purify their hearts, or blessed are those who are trying to purify their hearts. Is that the way you understand that beatitude?
It's a great question, Carl. I never thought of it quite like that. But what has occurred to me in reading the Beatitudes, which you can all find in Matthew 5, is that we tend to almost see those as taking a still picture of someone who is always and everywhere pure of heart. But or whatever the beatitude happens to be. But I think they speak to any and all of us at different times. Sometimes my heart is pure and sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes I'm more free from my attachments and, demons, and sometimes I'm not. And I think rather than try to categorize who are these people in the world out there who are always and everywhere pure of heart, the real question may be, what moments in my life has my heart been pure, and how has that transformed me in that moment? Blessed are those who mourn. We're not always, there isn't a group of people out there who are always and everywhere mourning, but most of us at this point in our lives know something of what it is to mourn, not as a perpetual state, but as a condition we undergo through periods of time. So I would invite you to look at the various Beatitudes as aspects of who you are and not categories of people outside of you, and ask, when am I more or less pure of heart? Right? When am I more a peacemaker, and when have I been less so? And what freedom or joy or tranquility comes from those times when I'm more about peace than about war or judgment? Because I think that there's a certain fluidity, it's like what in Matthew 25, the whole sheep and the goats that we've talked about, and how Olivia Clement really has that beautiful interpretation that says the sheep and the goats are not two different people, but two aspects of every person. Peacemakers and those who mourn are not two different kinds of people, but aspects of every person. And so the invitation as well as the challenge is to understand the fruits of being a peacemaker, and to move myself in that direction, and to understand what holds me back, what ties me, what binds me from being really a peacemaker. What are those ascetical practices that I can engage that will help me be a peacemaker, to free me from the judgments and the grudges and the prejudices I hold that prevent me from really being a person of peace, and so on. So I would encourage Carl, but all of us, if you want to start your meditation this week by looking at the Beatitudes, a nice place to look at those would be to go through them and ask, when has this been more me or less me? And what have been the fruits of both? I would love to know how you come away. Does that help, Carl?
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I see you as someone who's very pure of heart, and I know you well enough to say that. At least most of the time.
I'm basically just a shopkeeper.
Right. All right. Other questions before we move into a discussion of practice then? It's been a few weeks with Christmas and the New Year, so I'm not sure how many of you have done that. Jennifer, please. Always good to hear from you. How are you doing?
Hi. Yes, I'm so glad to be back. It's been a while. And as Penny said in the chat box, this has been such a rich conversation. I'm so grateful for you, Father Vincent. I just had a quick question about the opening and closing prayer. Did you say that you had written that, or?
I don't know if I said that, but I did write them.
Okay, I just love it. Thank you so much. And I especially love the part, as we look tenderly, we're great. I don't remember the exact words, but as we look tenderly upon all who are small of mind and heart, it's just made me feel like crying, because we all need that from each other. We need to try to offer that to each other, but we all each need it. And it's just so beautiful. So thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer, thanks for raising that. It should be obvious to everyone that I structured this loosely on the Lord's Prayer, obviously, but wanted to kind of give it a motherly rather than fatherly reading, because I feel that many of us have the fears we hold around doing an examination of conscience or really looking deeply at ourselves comes from the false, as far as I'm concerned, false idol of a Father God who is judgmental and overbearing, and that a prayer like this might help us to approach God in a way that allows us that maternal freedom and compassion to do the work I'm asking you to do, which is to look tenderly at yourself as much as others. So it's why I repeated the prayer twice as a little Lectio in itself, because I wanted you all to hear in this, to free it from those false ways that we've come often to identify God as Father, and to just allow us a different framework of knowing that we can do this work safely as before a mother in a mother's arms. So that's what I did. So I really appreciate your picking up on that, Jennifer. And hopefully for those of you that are struggling with the idea of a judgmental God, that a prayer like this might help at least just give you another way into the divine love for us, right? So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to also just say, yeah, it's so, the freedom is what's so key, freedom from fear and that safety, especially for someone like me who's a 6 on the Enneagram. So thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer, we share the 6-ness. I've discovered, much to my dismay. Danger everywhere. But there you have it. So thank you. But yeah, I do appreciate that. Thanks for your comments this morning. And Christine, I see your hand as well.
Thank you. One of the things that I have found so helpful on my journey is spiritual direction. And I wonder if you might speak to that.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question? I lost it, got mumbled there for a second.
Oh, the value of spiritual direction, being with someone, an anamkara, or someone who can help us zero in on what it is we're really needing to deal with in the moment.
Yeah, Christine, I really appreciate you bringing that up. After I responded to Kathy and we moved on, somebody had said something that made me wish I had gone back to responding to Kathy, and you've nailed it again, which is to say that, if we are struggling to identify, as Kathy asked, or even when we're really trying to look at the spiritual landscape of the interior self, we shouldn't always presume that that's best done alone, whether that be prayer or journaling, but in community, and particularly in the context of a spiritual director, or what the Celtic Christians would have thought of as their anamkara, their soul friend, that person who you can really bare your soul with and have an honest reflection back to you without threat or without fear of judgment and so forth. So thank you for saying that. One of the things that I found, even as a teenager who was really trying to grapple with how to be a good Christian and exploring the confessional as a way of really interrogating my own little teenage life, I realized very quickly that the laundry list of things you bring to an anonymous confessor has little value, as far as I'm concerned, for really developing a spiritually mature life. And that confession has always worked best for me in the context of spiritual direction, because here you have a person who is journeying with you in this interior landscape and doesn't just hear, oh, I did this thing again, I got grumpy or whatever the case, but sees, oh, but that actually relates to what you were talking about last month in this thing, right? And so what really helps is somebody who can, with loving, compassionate objectivity, help to reflect in you what you can't see in yourself, but which helps you talk yourself into clarity around. So Kathy, I know you're still there, and I hope that provides a little additional response. And Christine, thanks for raising that. But I do think whether that's small group or the trusted relationship of a spiritual director, or just a less professional relationship of an anamkara, that person you can really turn to. This is where I think a lot of this can come through. And a good friend has the ability to point things out in you that doesn't come from a place of judgment, but desire to really help you move into deeper clarity. So thank you for that, Christine. It's really poignant. Does that make sense? Does that feel, was that where you were kind of heading with that? Yeah, okay. Okay. All right, we have just a little time left. I'm not sure, given the time that's passed, how many of you even remember what this is, but we'll go back and just see if anybody's done the practice. First, here's the practice for, I'm suggesting for the coming week. At each of your evening meditations, and if you don't meditate in the evening, do it in the morning, take time to do a thorough and fearless examination of conscience, but to do it for real, even if you start with one beer can at a time, right? And every time you acknowledge a fault or failing or a shortcoming, I want to invite you to smile and to really practice that smile, right? Because I want your body to pray that trusting, right? Each of these things you're able to acknowledge is not provoking an angry God, but becomes an invitation for God to raise you up again. It's similar to what I offered before in when I was just talking about, the dryness of prayer and distractions. Distractions are not our defeat. They're an invitation. The moment you notice you're distracted, this gives me the chance to turn my attention, to turn my heart again to God. And in many ways, the acknowledgement of a fault or a failing or a shortcoming, why do I smile? Because I'm training myself, right? That I am doing this work not before an angry God, but before a God who is simply looking for me to turn again so that I can be invited to be raised up again. We need to know that we are in a very safe place when we do this examination, or else we will simply stop doing it. We will deny our capacity for shadow and darkness if we are so fearful that it will provoke anger or judgment or condemnation. And then what happens is we suppress those and we become spiritually schizophrenic, right? Pretending to be holy when in fact there's this mess of things going on beneath us that we are too afraid to look at. And then those things get projected to the outside world. So either we do the work on the inner battle. This is, remember what I talked about in the reading today, that when Jesus said, let the one without sin throw the first stone, that's a call to arms on the battlefield of your heart, because he is requiring everyone there to look first at their own shadow, their own darkness, their own sin, to do battle there before you project it on someone outside of you. And this is why work like this is so important. This isn't to say that God doesn't take sin seriously or that there aren't real moral failures that we have to look at either individually or societally, but it gives us the capacity psychologically, emotionally, spiritually to do that with authenticity. And that's what's so important, to do the work and to know that in that we become, we take those first steps toward that freedom that Paul talks about in the reading from Romans today. All right. Okay. From last week, let me try to get some room here. So I was asking you to be attentive to the suffering of someone in your life, friend, neighbor, coworker, and to take that initiative to respond compassionately, and then to ask how that gifted you. Again, not sure how many of you took up the challenge, but if any of you did, by all means, share it with us. I'd love to hear it. Otherwise we can wrap up too. Okay. Well, then that's two things you have to do this week. Okay, Kathy. Kathy, go right ahead.
So I have a situation that I think sort of fits this, but over the Christmas weekend, I stayed with my sister out on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State, and it was a lovely weekend. However, the day that she took me back to the ferry, we had a very hurtful interaction. It had snowed over the weekend while I was there. There was a lot of ice and snow all around. The night before, after we got back from our sunset walk, she had scraped the snow off the stairs leading up to the door that we always use. And she chipped away at some of the ice that was under the snow, but not very much. And so the next day when I needed to carry out my suitcase, and backpack, it was all ice. And I have osteoporosis, so ice and I are not friends. And so I had asked her the previous year when I took care of her cats, and it snowed, and I had to feed the birds every day and go out, and she had no de-icing substance, and there was a lot of ice, and so it was very treacherous because in order to put out the bird feeders, it's a lot of stairs with no handrails. So we tried to talk about this, but it ended up exploding, just really exploding. And the fear is not only for myself, but her husband is blind. So he cannot see the ice on the stairs. So he walks out the door, and it's dangerous for him as well. He's 78. So anyway, so I had to do a lot of soul searching. And then finally had a discussion with her last Thursday about it. We prearranged the meeting. Thankfully, she also journaled about it. And so what was beautiful about it is that we could come to this place of realizing our own parts in it and really hear the woundedness of the other person, and by being able to really hear each other on that feeling level, these separate warring souls of us could come together in this beautiful place of we. And I recognize that by doing this soul work, not only was I repairing a really painful breach in my relationship with my sister, I was also repairing my heart with regard to my relationship with God.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, thank you, Kathy. It's a great parable, really, for how intimacy with God and with others is so deeply intertwined, and that it becomes very difficult to have that intimate relationship in the interior life if you're at enmity with everybody around you or with anybody around you. Those two things are deeply connected. Thank you.
And that really surprised me to have that realization.
Yeah, no doubt. Yep. But now that you had it, I hope you remember that, because you'll see that plays out over and again, right? That those two things are deeply connected.
No, it felt like a very important transformational moment.
Wonderful. Good work. A for class participation. All right. All right. Thank you, Kathy. Paloma or Richard? And oh, there you go. You can go ahead. You're unmuted now. Yep, there we go. We're not able to hear you. Okay, I'm not sure if it's Paloma or Richard, but we can't hear you. I'm going to move to Father Andrew, and we'll try to come back to you in just a moment. Father Andrew, go right ahead.
Good morning. I'll be honest, I did not ponder your question as a conversation. Anyway, no, I spent about 28 years in hospital ministry, and I can tell you the stories I was hearing from them transformed me a hell of a lot more than I ever did for them. Just the stories, and the way they were handling their own stories. But the grace of God was just, I put my hands on, smeared some oil, read a scripture, but I was being the one who was being transformed. I was the one who was being healed. So, and I think a lot of folks have had that experience. It's not unique to me, but how am I being transformed by what I'm hearing, and those stories of suffering. Wow. They're still with me. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Father Andrew. Yeah, I totally get that. And I think you're right to say that is often the case, that when we initiate those things, the gift really does come back. There really is a sense of liberation that comes from that, and real joy and giftedness. Thank you for that. So Paloma and or Richard, we'll give you one more shot. Are you guys there? Okay, unfortunately, I think I think there's probably a technical glitch on your end. Patty, go right ahead.
Hi, this is the first time I've joined you live, but I have followed you on your recorded, and I've also read your book, but in that I'm, late in coming, I was wondering, is there any access, this is so off the topic, is there any access to your teaching that you gave on the book of Revelation, which was now a year and a half ago or so?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, let me try to walk you through that. So if you go to stcolumbus.inverness.org,
Yeah.
you'll come to this main page here that you see. And if you go to online offerings, you're going to see the Apocalypse Now course right there.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then
Awesome.
right. And then if you click on that, it'll take you to the actual page where you could register for that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Because I had gone to that website, but did not follow the right lead. So thank you. I'm looking forward
You're
to
welcome. Have fun, Patty. That was done sort of toward the opening of the pandemic. So I was trying to give a correct understanding of what apocalyptic literature is, which is in many ways comfort literature, more so than doom and gloom. So you can take that at your own pace. I think we went for about 6 weeks. So you can, and there's an accompanying booklet that will guide you through that. So you can take that at your own pace.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that didn't even have my screen on. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I loved your book, and I love going on walks, listening to these recorded talks.
Oh, wonderful. Good. Well, welcome. It's nice to have you.
Thank you.
All right. Richard, did we try a different device?
Yes, we did. Can we hear now?
Yes, go right ahead.
I was unmuted, but it wasn't coming out noise sound. So I wanted to first just ask, can you say the question so that I make sure that I'm speaking to what is actually relevant here?
You mean the question of the practice?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
We're recording on, because I just, my phone was having difficulty. I didn't want to be.
Sure. So it said, I was asking you to be attentive to the suffering of someone in your life, a friend, neighbor, or coworker, and then to respond compassionately to their own suffering. And
Great.
then to just reflect on how that gifted you.
Yes, thank you. So this was the main work that Richard and I were doing over the holiday, was going to be with my dad, who was recovering from surgery and in acute care at the post-acute rehab. And he wanted dearly to come home, and he wasn't strong enough to walk and to do it. So the doctors insisted that he go there, even though the family wanted him home and we wanted him home. So he was really down in the dumps, and it was Christmas. We were trying to get him home. So it got scarier because there were COVID cases among the staff. So the kind of upped the ante even more. So I would go during the day and take him on sort of hall passes and get him home during the day, but had to return him. And every time I returned him, he was like, why am I going back? Why am I not staying here? So finally, there was this one day, and Christmas went by. We couldn't get him home, and we couldn't get caregivers to hire so that I could even leave after this. And it was just getting more and more desolate. And then, and Richard had to come back to the Bay Area. So I was there alone handling all this. So the final day, and this was the suffering day part that was the gift, was I woke up in the morning just praying, going, God, show me how to get through this, how to get out of this. And I woke up, and the first thing that happened, there was a bird trapped in the dining room in his house. It was the weirdest thing. It was breakfast, and I was in his home alone, trying to get him into his home. And there was this bird trapped and so I talked to the bird, and finally it let me pick him up, this little bird. And then I carried it outside, and the bird went free in the house. And somehow that lifted my heart a little bit that this thing happened. And then I called over to the acute care, and they said that today we had to gown up because there were more COVID cases, including among the patients. And then I just went, hey, this is the special ops day. I'm just going there. I'm taking him out. I'm not bringing him back, and they can just like deal with it. It's just like, we got to free him like the bird. So that's what I did. I went, I wrote a lovely note saying we will attend to any paperwork needed, but this latest experience of 5 new COVID cases, including patients, requires for medical reasons that we, remove him immediately. And so we did. I called my sister, we went over there, we brought his own walker, we got him home. He was so excited. And they later actually admitted that we did the right thing, that he was well enough to come. But I guess I want to say the gift. The gift was the prayer of just being kind of taken to the edge of my own despair and fear and loneliness and everything, just like desolation, and seeing his suffering, just going, I can't bear this. I've got to do something. And it was the bird that taught me that just take him and get him out. And so that was the gift. And thank you for the prayers of this group in praying for him. And he's home and he's doing really well. Thank you.
Thanks, Paloma. I appreciate that beautiful story. Birds seem to often serve as little messengers of the divine, huh? More often than not. Well, thank you for that story. And that brings us actually to just about time. So I want to thank you all for, sticking it out and being here this morning. Welcome back in a very happy and, please God, healthy new year to all of you. I look forward to seeing you all again next Saturday. And in the meantime, go out into the world this week and be compassionate, starting with yourself, and be loving, and be free. And be free. So go with my blessing in the name of the 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. And I look forward to seeing you all again a week from today. God bless you now. Have a good day.